Welcome to the Decent Crypto Podcast. Today is Wednesday, July 20th. We are live from New York City with our newest episode, The 10 Commandments. I'm here with Matthew Blumberg. Matt, how you doing?
I'm ready. Let's get into it.
Let's go. The 10 Commandments of NFT Flipping. Let's go, baby. Matt, I'm going to kick it to you for our very first commandment. Number 1, Matthew Blumberg.
Commandment number 1, thou shalt take profit.
Thou shalt take profit. Okay.
So for context here, right? Like there's 40,000 NFT collections that are like actively tracked by OpenSea, and something like, estimates are all over the place, but it's something like 99% go to zero. Like as in like there's just no bid, or the highest bid is so low that like it's not worth the gas to sell it.
Yeah, so when you say that these things are going to zero, does that basically mean that nobody's placing a bid on them? There's zero sales. Like, how do you define going to zero?
I would say like the floor isn't selling, and you can't undercut the floor low enough to entice a sale. Is the idea. No matter how cheaply you list these things, nobody's buying them.
Okay.
So by going to zero, it's really from like the buying demand side. So it doesn't necessarily even mean that like the floor price is super low. It just means that like no matter how low you list your NFT, it just won't get sold.
Okay. All right, so that makes sense. So the very core idea of trading is to make money. So you want to take some profit if you should be lucky enough to make some. Okay.
Yeah. So when it comes to flipping, right, you really want to avoid a scenario where you're left holding an NFT. That's sort of like a big part of the game here. And so when you wind up in a scenario where you can take profit, you absolutely should. You can always buy back in later, right? Like you can FOMO in if it goes up more. But not taking profit will feel absolutely terrible, and it will wreck your mentality as an NFT flipper.
Okay, you said something that is very, very key, and something that I have struggled with more than anything else, where you always have the ability to buy back in at a higher price, even if it is a higher price, right? Like this is something fundamental that I think a lot of people miss in trading, because I did this so many times early on, and I still do this, but it's like you see a little pump and you say, okay, great. I still think this is going to go higher, right? Like, but it's very hard to know when that's going to happen. It could go higher a year from now, but it could go 80% down first, and you don't want to be holding that bag. So if it does go a little bit higher, you can say, well, I got a little bit of profit, and I think it's going to rip even harder, so I'll get back in, but right now I'm at a comfortable place. So how do you kind of like manage the mental part of that, where if I'm a Pudgy Penguin enjoyer, I think the Pudgies are going to go to 10 ETH, 20 ETH or whatever, right? But I've also been the guy that buys them at 3.5 and then it goes down to below 1. So like, how do you keep both of those views in your head and say, look, I'm long-term bullish on this thing, but at the same time, I need to take some profit? Like, how do you basically not marry your bags?
Good question. So I'm also, obviously, we're all guilty of having married a bag at some point. So the main idea behind flipping, right, is you're trying to take advantage of the fact that the market is illiquid, right? You're trying to buy when 2 or 3 people are like listing below one another and there's like a fire sale going on. You want to provide liquidity to a collection that you think is going to rebound. And so like don't confuse that with like long-term blue chip NFT investing. Right. But moreover, like you need to stay liquid. Right.
Yeah.
And so because the meta is always changing, and today's hot collection won't be tomorrow's hot collection, and there will always be something pumping. And so you need to stay liquid so that you have enough capital to like take advantage of market imperfections when you see them. If you're holding a bag, if you're holding a penguin, right, and it goes from, recently penguins went from like 1 and a bit to like 2.9 at the peak. And if you're holding at 2.9, just because you think it's eventually going to go to 10, then you're sitting there waiting, right? Like that's a very different mentality from flipping. Flipping is an active sport here. It's not a passive sport. And every day that you're in a penguin at 2.4 or 1.7 or anything lower than the peak is going to weigh on your psychology, right? It's going to feel like a bad idea. You're going to start questioning yourself. Then you're going to sell when it's down. You'd ideally like to sell when you can take some profit. And so really the core question here comes down to like, what are the costs to me of getting back in, right? So the costs are effectively like the seller commission, right? And the OpenSea fee. Or whichever marketplace, Coinbase NFT, I guess, doesn't charge fees.
Zero fees, baby.
It's your fees. But like, okay. But, you know, if you think it's going to go, so, you know, let's say in an extreme example, like if the royalties for the artist are 7.5%, if you think it's going to go, and then OpenSea is 2.5, if you think it's going to go down more than 10%, you should sell now, right? Like you can't go broke taking a profit.
Okay. Thou shalt take profit. Commandment number 1 of really any kind of trading, but especially NFT trading, NFT flipping. Thou shalt take profit. Okay. Now, the rest of the 10 commandments are about how to make profit. Matt, commandment number 2.
Wait, am I going? I thought you were going to.
Liquidity, liquidity, liquidity. The number 2 thing. The most important thing in these markets is to find the liquidity, right? So it's like most of these collections, like you said, they go to zero and there's just never going to be a bid. And like that's how you lose all your money. It's just like nobody's going to say like, oh, you lost all your money. It's just nobody's going to offer you anything for like the illiquid, stupid JPEGs that you own, right? So if you are trying to flip, if you are trying to look for the next trade or the next, you know, whatever, right? Like you said, the meta is always changing. So you have to find the next thing and you have to be where everybody else is. And so liquidity is the number 1 factor. You know, like you can't make profits if there is no market to sell into, right? I think you actually probably know a lot more about this just coming from a trading background. But like, what are some things you see in the NFT space from a liquidity perspective that make this such a different market to navigate versus even trading tokens or, you know, traditional markets?
Yeah, so there's really no market makers, or there are very few market makers in the NFT markets, right? And so liquidity tends to be there's a couple of reasons. So like one of them is historical. So historically, OpenSea was using the Wyvern exchange contract. And Wyvern didn't allow you to place collection bids. And so as a bidder, you say you're bidding 1 ETH for a penguin, right? And you're down to provide liquidity at that price point. Before, the way it worked was you needed to place a bid on a specific penguin, right? And in order to do that, you needed to set aside 1 ETH just to be like in escrow effectively until your bid gets canceled.
So you can't actually do anything with that ETH once that bid is placed. Is that the same with wrapped ETH? I think like with wrapped ETH, at least on OpenSea, you could place multiple bids with the same wrapped ETH, right?
Oh, I always thought it was like the sum of your outstanding bids couldn't exceed the amount of wrapped ETH you have in your account.
I think with wrapped ETH, they let you place multiple bids, and once one gets filled, the rest get canceled. I think that's to do with the fact that it's an ERC20 and not native Ethereum.
Yeah, I mean, well, so bids on OpenSea have always been wrapped ETH, which is why I'm wondering, like maybe I had this conceptualized incorrectly, but even then, right? Like, say you have 1 ETH and you're sitting there clicking on every penguin. I'll bid 1 ETH for this. I'll bid 1 ETH for that. It was like just not worth it from a time perspective. And then the second it gets filled, you have to put 1 more ETH in and bid again on each of the penguins, right? The new OpenSea contract, the Seaport contract, does allow for collection offers, as well as like way more complex kinds of offers. And so you can provide liquidity like in a much more capital and time efficient way. But still the NFT space is like very immature. And in market making, the way that you make profits, right, is by sitting at either end of the bid-ask spread. And so what you're inherently betting there is that like prices don't go way out of whack in one direction or the other, right? So this is why everybody gets wrecked providing liquidity on Uniswap. Like on average, people lose money providing liquidity on Uniswap. Like just like this is just what the data shows, right? And so the reason for that is, well, there's, one reason is that like centralized exchanges are faster, and so Uniswap is always like the receiving end of an arbitrage order, as opposed to like the giving end.
So it's just harder to make markets there. Versus
Just because it's like slower.
It's like execution,
right?
Right. Because you have to do everything on chain. So. Okay.
Yeah, but then the other issue is that like if you're providing liquidity to anything with volatility, that volatility is expensive to you as a liquidity provider, right? Like you don't really want to sit at the end of some bid-ask spread, asking on one side, bidding on the other, if like you think prices might go way out of whack and you just get picked off, right? So in traditional markets, you would call this toxic flow, that like you don't want to take the other side of, right? You don't want to provide liquidity to whatever kind of order. In the NFT markets, because everything like statistically does go to zero, basically it's a losing proposition to provide liquidity to most collections, like on average, right? Like you might be able to do it on something like Art Blocks where like it's going to stick around for a while. But even those, like, there is toxic flow in one direction or another. You could wind up selling your Fidenza for 70 ETH and now the floor is at 130. You could wind up buying, the latest drop at 5.5 and now it's down to 2.3.
Okay, so as an individual trader then, looking at these markets, like you just said, most things are going to go to zero. Most things don't have the liquidity to, be a market maker, and that's not the thing that we're concerned with. But how do you measure, like, how much liquidity is enough liquidity? I know you flipped things that are not necessarily in the top 5 or in the top, whatever collection. So you even yourself will go a little lower to find some stuff. So it's like, how much liquidity is enough liquidity? Is there certain stuff that you look at, like, historical sales? Like, are there a bunch of sales happening every single day at certain price points, like right at the floor? Kind of how do you like, what are things that you look at, and how do you like build that picture in your head?
So the first variable that I look at is you touched on, which is like the frequency of sales. And you can even compute just like on average per block, how many times does this NFT collection get sold, right? And it could be like 0.1 times per block or 0.01, right? But the general like lowest I will go is one sale every 2 hours. And even that feels like very, very risky, but you could do that for something like if it has like brand cachet, right? So like Beans are a good example. Azuki's other collection, Beans, like doesn't get a lot of volume per day, but people remember it, and so it's not going away. It's not going to zero, right? Because it's affiliated with this brand. And so like that's a great collection to look at, because when people want to sell their beans, like they just want to sell them, right? Like, and they'll undercut the floor by like 10, 15, 20%. And because they don't see a lot of volume, they don't attract a lot of bidders, and so the spread tends to be pretty wide there. So that's like a good example of one where like, yeah, it'd be like 12 sales a day or something. But you also want to look at the trend, right? Like if yesterday there were 12 sales, but the day before there were 50, and the day before that there were 1,000, like this thing's probably going to zero, right? So for a no-name collection, I would like to see a sale, multiple sales per hour is really like the sweet spot, I think, in terms of liquidity, where you can start to feel like, okay, this thing isn't like fully going away to zero. You see this a lot with free mints, where like the day that they mint out, right? If they mint out quickly, like they have a good social media presence and like a good mint strategy, and so they mint out quickly and they start flipping unrevealed on the secondary market. You tend to see a lot of liquidity that day, and then you really want to look at like how much does that decrease by the following day, right? So you saw this with the Saudis, right? Like a recent like collection that dropped. Did you see that they're like Saudi versions of Cypherpunks?
Of
and
the CryptoPunks, yeah. The
or
Saudis.
CryptoPunks, but
I love
yeah.
the Saudis are max bidding. They're here
It's
to
like a
save
funny,
your bags.
it's a funny collection, right? Like, and there's not that many pieces. Pretty like well distributed holder base. But the issue was they went absolutely ballistic in terms of volume one day. And then the next day, they actually, just because of like mint timing, the way that OpenSea measures like the daily sum of volume is actually on UTC. So they, started getting bid up like, 8, 9 p.m. UTC. And then the next day looked really good as well. The day that you want to look at in that scenario is the third day, right? So like depending on timing, it can be the second or third day. And you didn't see a lot of volume there. And so you knew that like you didn't want to buy in because they weren't sticky, right? Like they weren't holding or continuing to hold like the narrative or the like the mind share, the collective consciousness enough. So, and then you can even look at like the percentage of like you can go into OpenSea and look at the activity page, which is like I think like really underestimated alpha, and you can look and see like how many listings are happening on average relative to how many sales are happening. If you start to see like a lot of people listing at or close to the floor and not a lot of sales actually occurring, then you kind of get, you start to feel a little bit less comfortable about getting into, that's a great time to take profit. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. How do you measure liquidity? What do you think?
Well, I don't, which is why I'm a horrible NFT trader. So I look at the floor price and I'm like, oh, it looks good to me. But no, I think the thing that really sticks out is just knowing the fact, like you said, right? Just knowing or being comfy in the fact that when you do want to unload this thing, there will be somebody on the other side that's going to bid. And like I've had to undercut floors in the past. Like it's not like even then, like you can undercut a floor and still not make a sale. Like the thing might not go. Like you said, if it's going to zero, like nobody's going to save your bags. But I think looking at the historical kind of like actual activity for like the activity page is the best thing on OpenSea, right? Like it's amazing just looking back at where people are placing bids, where sales are actually happening, what kind of sales are actually happening. So like with the Saudis, right? Like I'm on the OpenSea activity thing right now, and it's like there's tons of sales happening. Like there's one 22 minutes ago, 27 minutes, 38 minutes, 44 minutes, but the price is like continually going down. And so like people are undercutting each other, and it's like really fascinating to see like what's going on. So to me, like liquidity is more of a way, and this is just how my mind thinks, is like a way to tell the story of what's happening in that specific market. And so it's a really good way to paint a picture. That's where I use like that's how I use this. Like, and look, I am not a great flipper. I'm not a good flipper. In fact, you could say I'm not even a bad flipper. I'm a horrible flipper. So, like maybe like I'm not the one to make a judgment on like what is the right level of liquidity. But what I will say is that you can get a sense of just like what's going on in like the big picture sense of this specific market, and kind of like get an idea of where people are coming from into this market and like how they're interacting with the market. And to me, the liquidity is a way to like paint a picture, right? So
it's about microstructure, like what people are actually doing.
And look, that's not as a measured of an answer as like you actually saying like, look, you want at least like one sale every 2 hours. Like that's much more actionable advice. But to me, as somebody who like thinks this way, it's a way to almost like understand the meta. It's like there is some amount of ETH in the NFT space. That general pie is increasing slowly. Right now, it's probably not. Right now, it's probably just the same pie, right? But the ETH in that world, in that ecosystem, is moving around everywhere. And like that is basically what the liquidity is, right? So like follow the liquidity, understand where it's going, understand why people are putting their money into those things, and then you can actually look back historically at like how did this play out in the market itself, and like you can see that live too. So yeah, to me it's like a way to paint a picture and to tell a story and to really understand the meta. And like with NFTs, like me, I mostly just buy and hold. I like to just marry my bags. So that's my strategy, but it is a super powerful tool for like understanding the meta to me.
Yeah.
All right.
Speaking of marrying bags, let's move on to the next commandment.
Matt, commandment number 3.
Commandment number 3: flipping is not curating. So we're talking about a very specific like thing, activity here. Flipping, right? Buying and then selling, right? It's an impermanent thing, right? Curating. So here's where people tend to get into trouble. Something starts pumping, the floor's going up. They buy it, they FOMO in because the art is really cool. And they're like, oh, it's pumping because the art is really cool. They're not wrong, but the art being cool is not enough to sustain a high floor price, right? The art being cool might be why it's pumping, right? But there's plenty of art out there. Like, on Ethereum alone, there's like really super cool art that's available for 0.0001 ETH, right? Like there's a lot of cool art in the world, in the physical world, right? On Tezos, right? Like on Tezos, you can get like really cool generative art for like
I was gonna go with
hundreds of
graffiti,
dollars.
but you went with Tezos.
Yeah. One of them's a drag on society, and the other one is graffiti.
Oh man!
So
don't come after us, Tezos people.
Yeah. The issue with Tezos, right, is the liquidity again, right?
Yeah.
But it's just not where market participants are coming to interact. So when it comes to flipping, a lot of times what you'll do is you'll buy this bag, you'll buy this NFT, the art's really cool, floor price is going up, you don't take profit, floor price starts going down, you don't sell, you commit to not sell. And then fast forward a couple of days and there's no bid. And you're like, well, I guess I'm an art collector now.
Yeah, I always love the art. If we were all art collectors and curators, we would all just be art collectors and curators, not flipping JPEGs. So we should just stay in our lanes. Yeah, I think, look, getting back to the first point you made, good art is not enough to sustain a floor price, right? I agree. What is enough to sustain a high floor price?
It's
that's the magic question.
It's intangible, right?
Community,
it's like,
bro.
I guess there's community, right? There's also NFTs. The NFT markets are in one respect, they're like meme markets, right? Some memes stick around because they're good and people continue to use them. And people continue to like them. But a lot of memes are like, flash in the pan, right? Like, so that's sort of how I would describe it. It's pretty intangible, but it's effectively like what's going to continue to captivate public attention.
90% of memes go to zero. That's what you're saying.
Yeah,
no, that's really good framing, actually. Like, these are meme markets. They're literally meme markets, And like looking back, you can look at the history of financial markets, and like some memes last and some memes don't. That's a great framing, I think. Like, you see Dogecoin still as a top 10 crypto, right? And then on the other side, you see what happened with like something like AMC or GameStop, RIP, and then whatever. So yeah, like, I think that's the perfect framing. Like, these are truly meme markets. Like, if you think this meme has staying power, that's when you should marry your bags. Don't ever marry your bags, actually. But,
well, no. I mean, you should buy art, right? Like, you should support digital artists. You should buy cool art that you like. You should just treat it as art. So, like, my pro tip for this is to have a second wallet. Have a wallet that you use just for acquiring art, a collection that you like, something that like you do want to hold on to, and you're not planning on flipping. That way you don't get confused.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great piece of advice. I look when I'm saying, like ignore the art, stuff like that. I mean that just from a pure flipping perspective. Like here, just trying to make as much ETH as possible, just trying to stack ETH, right? If that is your objective here, like, yeah, ignore the art. But there's a lot of cool stuff in the NFT world. Like, there's a lot of cool stuff to buy, a lot of cool people to support. Don't get me wrong. Like, I love a lot of the NFTs out there. What I mean is that don't get drawn into something and like marry your bags because you think like the price is going to go higher because of, I don't know, cool art.
Yeah. I mean, look, maybe from our perspective, like, we're just bad at collecting art. Like, I'm bad at collecting art, objectively. Like, I'm colorblind, right? And I also have no fucking taste. Like so,
Matt is
so
literally
maybe,
colorblind.
Yeah. Like, maybe we're, just not good at it, and maybe that's your game. But if your game is flipping, then, like, it's not really about the art.
Yeah. This is very true. That said, one of the hottest collections right now is the Factura, which is like this generative thing made by GM Studios. Incredible art, and it's just popping off. Even though, actually the floor got cut in half the last like 2 days. Okay, now I'm rambling. Amazing. Number 3, flipping is not curating. All right, let's move on to commandment number 4. Mint double and sell half immediately. So, if you are so lucky to be in some kind of whitelist and you can mint 2, always mint 2. Don't just mint 1. Even if you're buying, I would say like many times it's really worth looking at buying 2. If you truly believe in the collection as a flipper or whatever, even as a long-term holder, like many times I'll buy 2 or 3, just because if you do decide to part with 1, which you should always do if you're in profit,
you should take profit.
Take the profit, part with 1. Stack the ETH, and then just enjoy with the other 1 or the other 2 that you have.
This is so underrated as advice for NFTs, right? Like, because it's not just about, not wanting to give up your upside in the collection, succeeding as a whole. Like, it's also about your community, right? And God forbid it's your profile picture, right? Like, I have a penguin as my profile picture. I wanted to sell it at 2.9 ETH. I couldn't do it partially because I didn't want to update my profile picture everywhere. Partially because I do think the penguins are going higher. Had I bought 2, it would have been a really easy decision to just take profit there. And then it's also about the community, right? Like if you've made your big crazy group of internet friends by being in a Discord with a bunch of other people that hold cartoon penguins, like it's not easy to give that up, right? It's a part of your life. It's part of your identity is the communities that you interact with.
Absolutely, especially with something like the apes. It's almost like being shunned by your people. If you leave that, if you sell your ape and you leave, like, yeah, a lot of people will actually not look at you the same way. Like a lot of people's Twitter profile starts with BAYC number or whatever. There are people whose Twitter handles are like punk40 whatever, punk6529, like so could you imagine like somebody like punk6529 if he only had one CryptoPunk and some like if he wasn't a super rich guy or whatever, he only had that one thing that was the core of his identity, and it's like, well, now I got some bills to pay. Like, should I sell this thing for $100,000 and pay off all my bills and lose my whole digital identity forever and like get canceled by some whatever internet mob, like
the Illuminati?
The Illuminati. It's a really interesting thing, and that's why you should always just get 2. If you really believe in something, even if you're gonna flip it, I would say, like, especially if you're gonna flip it, actually, it makes a lot of sense to go in and buy 2. Like, here's the other thing, like, this is a question for you. Like, at what point do you, like, if something is going to be 50% of your, like, liquid ETH, right? Or, like, let's say it was going to be 25%, right? Like, that's a big position, but, like, it's kind of reasonable if you're going to flip something and you're good at it. But then, in that case, like, would you buy 2 and make it 50% of your portfolio? Like, like, what if you're in that position? Like, what would you do?
we're about to get metaphysical here. The way that I see illiquid markets is very much like quantum physics, right?
Oh,
so
God.
you have your electron, it's in its superposition, it's spinning up and spinning down. But the second it gets observed, the moment it gets observed, it's only in one of those two positions. You should always hold in your mind that there are two possible things that can happen here. It can go up or it can go down. And you really need to be balancing not only your assigned probabilities to these outcomes, but also your assigned utility, right? How happy will you be if this thing that represents 25% of your liquid ETH goes up and you buy two and then you get to sell one and watch the other one ride versus like not participating in this opportunity, right? Like there's always a new meta. You don't have to be in a trade. You know, if you've identified that the only good trade is something that's just too high of a floor price for your current like liquid ETH, don't get into it.
Does this NFT spark joy? Ask yourself.
If you're good at it, right? Being good at flipping NFTs is only having like a 70% hit rate at best, right? Like this was in like the Chainalysis like study that they did, which is like really cool. Highly recommend it. From 2021. The best cohort of NFT flippers, they have like a 65% hit rate. You can always be wrong, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Like life is complicated and unpredictable. You can always be wrong. Sometimes I like memes that people don't like, right? And then I keep sending them and people don't respond positively. And by sometimes I mean all the time, right? Like you need to, I would argue that it's better to participate in an opportunity where you can afford to have two than one that you're relatively high convicted in where you can only afford to have one. Because the other issue is that like in the bad world, right, in the bad outcome, it starts going down. You want to recover as much value as possible. Like you want to cut your losses, right? Like you don't want to hold it to zero and be like, oh, I love the art, right? You want to be ruthless with taking profit and losses. And it's much easier to cut your losses on one of the two. Right. And then if the floor price goes back up, you're like, well, I still have one. Right. But if the floor price continues to go down, you can still try and offload the other one. You want to try to capture like every 0.0001 ETH is worth something. Try to capture that. And so, minting double or buying double is just like, psychologically, it liberates you to make the rational decisions.
Very, very strong advice. Okay, Matt, I think this is your favorite commandment by far. Commandment number 5, Matthew Blumberg.
Commandment number 5, thou shalt not buy mid-rares. This is my favorite commandment by far, you're right. So, like, I'm sure anybody that made it to commandment number 5 in our podcast knows what mid-rares are, and knows what rarities are, but, the different traits on different NFTs in a given collection, some of them are more rare than others, right? So, like, an ape with golden fur is super rare, an alien punk is super rare, punks with cigarettes are pretty rare. Like, the thing that when you're looking as a flipper, it's all about liquidity. It's all about who's going to buy that from you, right? And in barter, there's this system there's this notion of a coincidence of wants, right? Where like you have to want the same thing that someone else can offer you in exchange for the thing that they want, right?
If I make bananas and you make oranges, I need to want oranges and you need to want bananas. Otherwise, we can't trade. That's why money exists.
Yeah. And so if you don't assign the same inherent value to whatever level of rarity as a different market participant, then like you can't really trade above the floor. You can't turn around and sell an NFT above the floor, even if it's 10% rarer than the one that's sitting on the floor. And so when it comes to flipping, it's about getting in, getting out, right? It's about, and that getting out is by far the most crucial aspect of it, right? You can always miss a collection, but if you buy into a collection and you can't turn around and sell it, then you're fucked, right? Like missing a pump is like not an issue, right? There's always something capturing the meta. There's always something worth buying, or generally there's something worth buying to flip. But if you get into anything and then you can't get out, then you're absolutely fucked. You've basically just burned your ETH.
Yeah, so I think this goes back to commandment number 2, which is liquidity. So with mid-rares, there will be liquidity, but the liquidity will be at the floor. It will not be at the value that you've ascribed to this thing, right? Like, it could, yeah, like you said, it could be even 40% more rare, like whatever, however you define that, right? Like, it could be, you know, yeah, it could be quite a bit more rare, but the set of market participants that are looking for that thing are tiny. Like, very, very tiny. There's only, like, maybe 10,000 people in general that care about this thing, at most. Like, probably way less. And the amount of people that care about that mid-rare are, like, maybe a dozen, at most, again. And so you just don't have many bidders. And, like, buy a mid-rare if you want, but only pay floor for it. Like, don't pay higher. Like, don't pay more. Like, don't pay 40% more for 40% more rare thing. Like, that's not how these markets work. It's not a one-to-one kind of thing. If you are going to pay more for a rare, get like one of the 5 rarest ones, or one of the 20 rarest ones. Like, something that is truly like almost a one of one, where it can be clearly picked out and like displayed in a like very unique way to everything else in the collection.
Yeah, and I mean, getting 10 out of 10,000, like, that's actually probably about the right percent, right? Like, this is not an exaggeration here. There are maybe 50 or 100 punks that are substantially different enough that they will sell for more than the 4. And they'll sell for a lot more than the 4. They'll sell for millions of dollars when, like, the 4 punk is at 50 grand, right? Like,
it's
you know, it sounds...
with the punks, you can, like, pick them out. It's like an alien punk, and I think there's, like, 12 of them or something. Or, like, an ape punk, and there's, like, I don't know, 28 of them or 30, I don't know the number. Something like that, and that's it. Like, you don't really want to pay higher. Like, maybe, like, a gold chain one or something. Like, some of them are a little bit higher, right? There's, like, the hoodie punks, the... whatever, the gold chain ones and things like that are a little bit higher, but it's like, that's basically where you want to draw the line.
I mean, the other thing is that, like, the average buyer into the punks is different from the average buyer into any other collection, right? So the average buyer into the punks has a lot of cash on hand. They want one that they resonate with because they're making a large investment in it. So you could argue that, like, rarity within the punks is, like, the most priced in out of all of the collections, I would say.
Definitely. And this again goes back to liquidity, where it's like, this is the most liquid market outside of maybe the Bored Ape collection in the NFT world, and because of that, it's also one of the most efficient markets in the whole NFT world, which is not saying much, but it is one of the more efficient markets, right? And like, if you actually want to get a deep dive on like how the punk market operates, there's this great interview by I forgot who hosted it. We'll post it in the show notes, but the guest was Deez Fi, I think, on Twitter, and he was basically saying like how he got into the punk ecosystems like a year and a half ago or whatever. He's watching very specific punks, like looking at their rarities for like months and months and months, and like looking at which ones came on the market, and looking at like one specific one that he just had his eye on with like specific traits and things like that. And he watched it for like 3 or 4 months, finally got into a price range that he was comfortable with, and then he bid on it and he got it. And it's like, these markets operate way differently than, I don't know, even like the Pudgy Penguins. Nobody's doing that for the Penguins, right?
Yeah, penguins are a great example, right? So you might have a penguin at the floor that has a t-shirt and like a hat that's not cool. And it might be priced at 1 ETH. And then there might be one at 1.02 ETH that has a fishing hat, and you like the fishing hat. If you're flipping, don't pay 0.02 ETH more. You're going to tell yourself, it's only 0.02 ETH more. You won't recover that in value if the penguins pump, right? You're just going to be trying to sell it at a higher price than you paid. Like, the liquidity is always at the floor, or just below the floor. And God forbid the penguins go down after you spend that extra 0.02 ETH. You're definitely not going to recover it in that scenario if you try to cut your losses.
Yeah. Commandment number 5. Thou shalt not buy mid-rares. All right, Matt. Let's get to commandment number 6. It does not pay to be a contrarian. Look, these are meme markets. There are no contrarian memes. right? The whole idea of meme markets is that you have to be in on the meme, right? I can make the greatest meme of all time and share it with you and all my friends, and if nobody laughs, then it's not a meme. It's just me laughing at my own joke, right? You have to be in on the memes, and you have to ride the wave in a way, right? Like, don't try and be out here saying, oh, like, this is amazing art. Ooh, this artist has never been heard of and is from like this small town in Brazil and is like gonna make this happen. If you like all that stuff, just support the artist. Buy some good art, right? Don't get into this saying like, oh, nobody's figured this out. I'm the only one that knows. Like, maybe that's the case, but nobody's gonna buy your bags then, right? Like, in the end, you're in this to flip. You're in this to find the next buyer. And this sounds like we're peddling Ponzi's here. But in the end, you're here to flip, right? We're talking purely about trading and flipping. If nobody's going to buy the thing from you, there's no reason to get in, right? So don't try and play this, like, contrarian thing. Like, like, don't think of yourself as, like, some Peter Thiel figure in the NFT markets. Just ride the wave.
Yeah. Your job is to see the wave forming, start swimming, catch the wave, and get out before it breaks.
The most important thing in that whole process is knowing where you are in the wave, right? The wave could be crashing and you think that the wave is just building up and it crashes right on your head. You don't want that. Knowing where you are in the wave, in the cycle, knowing how early you are is fundamental. Very, very important. And it's also, like, I think in some ways, right, like, you can be a contrarian in the things that you're looking at and the things that you're studying. Like, you always want to be thinking for yourself and looking at things, like, just from your own point of view, right? And I think that kind of research part of it, you should be a little bit more contrarian and not just listen, like, what's going on Twitter. Like, that's not what we mean at all. What we mean is, like, don't be a contrarian in where you're actually putting your money. If everybody is talking or not talking, if everybody is bidding on a certain collection, if the money is going in a certain place, if the liquidity is going somewhere, don't fight that, right? Like, maybe fight, like, the noise, like, fight whatever everybody is hyping, but don't fight the liquidity. Go where the liquidity is. You have anything to add there?
No, it's a great piece of advice.
All right, let's move to commandment number 7.
Commandment number 7. Diversification in the NFT market is about holding ETH and NFTs. So,
okay,
a lot of people
what do you
would
mean by
say,
this?
so we're all taught to think about, holding a diversified portfolio, right? And, like, decrease your risk because things are less correlated, right? Then they're not like one-to-one correlated. And so diversification, ideally you offset your losers with winners, and then you win more often than you lose, and so you're diversified. In the NFT markets, the narrative, the hot ball of money running around the market, the public consciousness is not big enough to support more than like 2 or 3 metas at a given time. And that's like a high number, right? Usually there's one meta that's driving the market and maybe 2 collections that enjoy that.
What would you say it is right now? Like generative art?
Generative art right now, for sure. 100%.
Factura is the big collection. Yeah. Or even these, like, kind of like second, if we're saying there's 2 metas, maybe it's generative, and then maybe there's like the secondary, like, influencer meme kind of thing, like the G Money, like the Punk 6529, some of these collections.
Yeah, the like exclusive community access NFTs.
Yeah.
So at any point in time, though, right, like there's maybe 1 or 2 like larger meta narratives, and then like just a few collections worth buying.
Yeah.
There are times when there are no collections worth buying, right? You don't want to get overextended. Like I was saying before, you don't want 50% of your liquid ETH in one collection, right? And if there's only 2 or 3 collections worth buying, if there's 2 collections worth buying, it stands to reason that you shouldn't actually have 100% of your liquid ETH in NFTs, right? Because no collection should be 50% or more. I mean, that's pretty degenerate, right? In reality, diversifying in NFTs is not just at a given point in time, it's across time. So what I mean by that is you place a bet today on buying some item in some collection. If that's the only one worth buying and you've hit your like portfolio allocation like comfort level there, then you should wait and hit the next day, there will be something, right? And then if your first one turns out well, sell, take profit, recycle that into the next thing, but not the next best thing at that given point in time, right? This is very contrarian to something like a portfolio of stocks, where like you do want to hold multiple assets because there are factors that drive some of them up and down on the same day. Those are stocks, right? Like those aren't predisposed to all go to zero. NFTs are predisposed for a lot of them to go to zero, and so the marginal collection that you buy increases the probability that your portfolio as a whole goes to zero. So on a given day, you shouldn't be buying all top 10 by volume. Yeah. That's a losing strategy there. Most of them will go to zero. You should be looking for specific market inefficiencies and acting on them when you see them, and holding enough ETH that when you see a great opportunity that you are able to participate. So diversification is about holding ETH and NFTs. The optimally diversified portfolio of NFTs has a lot of ETH in it.
Interesting take. This is something I haven't heard too much. Now, like within that framework of diversification, would you also say you want to diversify within like different parts of the NFT market? Like most of the stuff we've been talking about, like, look at this as like a meme market, stuff like that applies to PFPs. And really, it does apply across the board. But like, would you say that there is some kind of merit or, something
like, should you be diversifying across, say, sectors?
Like generative
like a PFP,
versus PFP
a generative,
versus like
metaverse land.
Yeah, maybe not that, but the rest of it. Would you do
my answer
that?
is no, absolutely not. Okay. Right? Only one of those is really going to be popping off at any given time, and if you're paying attention to like the market activity and the microstructure and like what people are actually doing and spending money on and where the liquidity is, you will be able to identify which one of those things is happening right now.
I see.
Right? Metaverse land is the great example. You're like, well, maybe not that. And the reason we're saying that is because like it's been down only forever, right? But there was a time when it was really popping off. Remember NFT Worlds, right?
Yeah, NFT Worlds, when basically like the 3 months after Facebook made their announcement and changed their name to Meta, that was like the easiest trade, which obviously I missed. You could just buy anything metaverse related and it would just rip like 5x in 3 days sometimes, like some crazy stuff. Like even these big like not even collections, but like the Sandbox or Decentraland, like that stuff was going crazy for like months. And then a bunch of these projects came out like NFT Worlds that are basically just like land kind of based.
And even they had a moment in the sun, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Well, not Yuga Labs is, right?
Other side, yeah. Other side, I mean, even other side, like, it did okay.
Yeah, I mean, for a minute,
for
right?
Them,
but but now it's at like 2 and a bit ETH, right? It went as low as 1.9.
That's wild.
Or 1.97, yeah. That was one where you looked at it, you're like, all right, this is probably underpriced. These are going to come back, and there's always going to be a buyer. Yeah. So, like, I bought that, like, dip, right? But broadly speaking, like, like, people don't care about a lot of different kinds of meme at a given time. They, like, want to riff on the same meme and
true.
Enjoy with their friends, right? So, no, you definitely shouldn't be diversified across sectors in the NFT space. And, there are times when you don't want to be diversified across sectors in the liquid, fungible token space. But there it's a lot harder to identify what the coming narrative is, and it changes a lot more quickly. Like day to day, it could be like today L1s are having a good day. Tomorrow it could be like metaverse related tokens like Sand or like Mana are popping off. Could be just Bitcoin, right?
It's never Bitcoin.
It's a lot. Like when Russia invaded Ukraine, right? Like Bitcoin was by far the biggest outperformer in the market.
No, the Bitcoin always has its day. I think that's a really good way to look at it, because diversification is much more important across time and across like other like actually uncorrelated assets like ETH, like uncorrelated to the NFT market. And within that, like, don't overthink it. Great commandment. Okay, number 8. Rumors get bought, news gets sold. Plan accordingly. So I think we've seen this at every single stage. Like, big announcement happens, people are like, yo, this is going to be a game changer. First of all, the announcement always gets front run because people always know. It always leaks. And once the rumor gets going, like, nobody can keep a secret, right? The rumor mill is always way stronger than whatever happens in reality. And so all this stuff usually ends up getting priced in a little bit early before the news happens. And people love a good rumor, and so this stuff always picks up. So just ride that wave. Once there's a date for the launch of whatever the thing is, that is usually the time when you can start looking at your exit. You know, it's like, okay, good, now I have a date. So Pudgy Penguins just literally tweeted out July 22nd, 2022. I think this is like 2 days ago. And it's like, perfect, I should start selling now. Of course, I didn't do it. But in theory, if I was good at any of this stuff, that's what I would do. I think, like, I don't know, buy the rumor, sell the news. Like, this is a tried and true strategy here.
Tale as old as time.
Tale as old as time. You got anything to add? I feel like that's a simple one.
Yeah, it just is what it is, right?
It is.
People in the NFT space, they like feeling like they're in on something. They like feeling like they've identified alpha early.
Mm-hmm.
And so in reality, like, the vast majority of, like, fundamental, like, not necessarily quantitative, but like fundamental driven NFT investors, they're scrolling through Discords. They're looking at Twitter all the time, right? They're listening to Twitter Spaces. They're paying a lot of attention to get the early hints that, oh, the Penguins might have something going on. Penguins announced that something's going on the 22nd. And then maybe you have, like, a day for, you know, normies like you and me who, like, aren't, you know, trolling through, like, Discords all day to, like, oh, okay, yeah, I could buy one now. And then, like, and then, like, the next day and the day of the reveal, it's always a selling catalyst, right? Because then people are like, what's next, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, the next commandment is very, very related. Matt, you want to hit this?
Commandment number 9, thou shalt not hold through the reveal. This is my second favorite one, because it just without fail is, like, accurate, right?
There's been zero, maybe one instance of a collection holding value and even going higher after the reveal. That was Azuki.
Yeah, I was going to say Azuki. We all remember it because it was so notable.
Even then, there was a slight dip where it did go below the price it was at before the reveal, and then people just slurped it. Another tale as old as time. Like, just don't hold through the reveal. Buy it again after. Like, if you pick the ones you like and buy them. Like, sell before the reveal.
I mean, so I have a like, statistical, like, explanation of why this is true. So, prior to the reveal, generally the tokens or the NFTs will trade, in theory, right, like, around the mean of the outcome price, right? So say the, you know, post-reveal price is going to be, on average, like, 1 ETH, right? But in reality, of those, there's, like, 30 that are worth 10 ETH, and then, like, all the others are worth less than 1 ETH, right? I don't know if the numbers won't exactly work out there, but you see what I'm getting at.
Yeah, definitely.
So if you have 2 pieces of a 10,000 piece collection, the number that you need to look at is not the mean, right? It's closer to the median, because the mean really applies when you know, back to statistics 101, right? As you take more samples, on average, the result that you get will be the mean. But you're not taking 100,000 samples from a collection of 10,000. You're taking 1 or 2. And so you really need to have in your mind the probability that, like, yours is going to trade below the mean post-reveal price. There's also another element here, which is, like, behavioral, which is that, like, people like a lottery. People like to have an unrevealed one. And then, you know, they're hoping that they're going to get, like, one of the really rare, like, 50, right?
So there's, like, 2 to 3 big reasons that I can think of to not hold past the reveal. Number one is, like, purely pricing. Like you said, there's a very low chance that it's going to be worth more after the reveal, like, statistically. Second thing is, like, you know, it's almost like playing on your lottery system kind of thing, where or like the fact that we're wired to enjoy these lotteries. But the thing that is most important to me is psychological, because after that reveal, you're gonna have these like this like weird attachment to the two things that you just minted and or like bought, and then like they've revealed in your wallet, and like you can see it happen in OpenSea or whatever. And you're going to be like, oh, even if you don't like the art, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, those are mine. Like, you're going to have this weird attachment to it, and you're not going to see things rationally. So if your focus here is to flip, like, take that out of it. Try and be as objective as possible. If you got a little pump before the reveal, sell it. There will be a dip after the reveal. Pick the ones you like. Find the cool ones at the floor. Don't buy some bullshit rare ones. And then just pick those up, right? Like, it's just play that. Like, don't be like getting too attached. That's how you truly marry your bags.
Yeah, I mean, riffing on that, right? Like, when you see the one in your wallet, like beans was a good example, right? You could wind up with a bean that has just a hat, or you could wind up with a bean that has a hat and a sword. And you're gonna be like, wow, that sword is like worth more, right? Because it has a hat and a sword.
Yeah.
That is exactly the same. Not selling that at the floor is exactly the same as buying it as a mid-rare.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? You're on the losing end of that trade every single time.
Look, the commandments all tie in together. This is just like an approach, you know?
Yeah.
You gotta look at these. It's a mindset. These are meme markets. You get in, you get out, you stack your ETH, and you enjoy. That's how you do it. Which leads us to commandment number 10. You should probably just not be flipping NFTs. This is the commandment that I made for myself, and I stick by it. This is not my game. This is Matt's game. Just know that if you're flipping NFTs, you're trading against Matt, not me. So, maybe stay out of the market. Maybe just enjoy. Buy some penguins that you like, buy the art that you like. Stack some ETH. Maybe don't get involved. Enjoy your life. Look at me. I'm enjoying. I'm down bad, but still enjoying.
Yeah, I mean, flipping is like gambling, right? In a way, in that the house always wins, and so on average, someone loses. It's a negative sum market for the participants. So, if it's not your game, you probably shouldn't be playing.
In a real sense, I think that 70% number you mentioned earlier is really important, kind of at the beginning of the show. That's the benchmark. Like, you want to be hitting 7 out of 10. Like, you don't need to be hitting 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10. But, like, you should be hitting at least 6, probably 7 out of 10 just to be in the game. And you'll get better over time, right? This is why we made this show. But, like, that's the benchmark you should be looking at. If you're not doing that, if you're going to consistently be going 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10, like, you're just going to blow your account. So, just know that.
Yeah.
Go in.
And it's easy to feel like if you're doing 5 out of 10, but your 5 winners are bigger than your 5 losers, it's easy to feel like you're being better at it, like you're better at it than you actually are. Right? But, like, someday that might change, and it should really be about, like, how good are you at identifying market opportunities, and that's where the winning, the batting average comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. The name of the game with flipping is just hitting singles over and over and over again, and most people are not wired that way. Like, they want to hit home runs, and taking those big swings, trying to hit home runs is how you blow your account, and, like, that's not the mindset for flipping. So make sure you have the right mindset. Make sure you're armed with the right tools. In fact, in the future, we might make an episode about, like, different tools that we use, things like that. I think that'd be a good value add for people. But these are our 10 commandments. Matt, do you have any thoughts to leave our listeners with?
Enjoy.
All right. We'll be back later this week with a recap of everything that happened. Until then, stay decent.
None of this was financial advice, legal advice, investment advice, or any other kind of advice. If you're looking for advice, you are definitely in the wrong place. Until next time, stay decent.